And on to another form of detection, detect magic. I feel pain from this spell.
Want to see a magic trick? Good. Abracadabra!
First level divination, ritual, casting time of 1 action, range of self, opponent's verbal somatic, duration, concentration, up to 10 minutes. For the duration, you sense the presence of magic within 30 feet of you. If you sense magic in this way, you can use your action to see a faint aura around any visible creature or object in the area that bears magic, and you learn its school of magic, if any. The spell can penetrate most barriers, but it is blocked by 1 foot of stone, 1 inch of common metal, a thin sheet of lead, or 3 foot of wood or dirt. I'm pained because of warlocks. So, before going to that and elaborating on that statement, let's talk about the spell itself. Similar to Detect Evil and Good, it allows you a 30-foot radius and 10-minute time, 1 action, except this one can be cast as a ritual, so trumps it a bit. Even though a first level's not that big of a sacrifice, and the reason I didn't hark too much on the last one not being a ritual is that particular situation with extraplanar entities and consecration or desecration is a little more particular, so spending a spell slot versus always casting a ritual, you're probably going to know before you head into the event, or you don't have to do it as much. Whereas Detect Magic, you're living in a fantasy setting, you're going to have magic in a lot of places, or potentially a lot of places, which is why potentially having it almost always up or always available through ritual is pretty nice. And even then, without the ritual, it still follows the same exact specifications as Detect Evil and Good, so it's only an action, verbal somatic, self, range of 30-foot radius. The only issue is for a specific school, you then have to focus on it, and depending on what specific schools means, that can change how you interpret what the item is, and again, that's more setting specific. Still blocked by the same things the previous spell can be blocked by, but that's not going to come up too often, outside of searching for magic items in a room similar to the consecrated or desecrated items previously. But where I've seen this most used, well, I've seen this in a few cases most used, whether it's something suspicious of being a magic item, some kind of potential magical trap, and on people and warlocks. We'll get to warlocks. But usually before a meeting, a lot of my players have become either efficient, effective, or paranoid enough to always cast this or have this ready before meeting some other big figure or some other potential adventuring party or some other villain to see if they have any magic items on them, and if they can kind of gauge on what their ability is. They've gotten used to on nobles or some other casters of some kind spotting some abjuration items and similar things like, oh, that's a ring protection, or that's a cloak protection, or if it's not one of those two things, or we can't identify it from it looking similar. I'm getting a little too specific and on how my own settings magic system works, which allows you to kind of gauge what magic items are as well. So stepping away from that at a moment, still being able to identify the number of magic items or magical consumables such as potions or scrolls or other potential objects that you have to worry about, or a powerful staff. Or in another sense, it's not just items or traps, or it's spell effects, whether they have a spell currently cast on them and what school it is, or whether something's trapped or a glyph of warding or an illusion is protecting it. That's a big one. Unless you have Sequester, that's going to appear as illusion. It's a first level divination spell trumping most illusion spells. I don't really need to tell you how useful that can be. That's really good. Or spotting what is previously thought to be a mundane object, seems to have some other magical influence on it, seeing if anything's scrying on you, other divination effects that can appear, other spell effects or curses you might not know you're already under the influence of. Detect magic's application in a setting where magic is the majority of how things function, at least the weird effects. I mean, this entire series is spells that take up an entire year worth of days. Detect magic's gonna come up. We haven't touched items, we haven't touched creatures, we haven't touched planes, we haven't touched locations. There's a lot of things that can be detected with just detecting magic. Even some of the disguise effects of the previous creatures we just talked about with Detect Evil and Good. While some of their disguises might be simply changing physically and are covered by other identifying things, some of those are just using illusion to disguise, or some of them having a key magic item, like some hags having a specific artifact on them that is almost always present on them, like the night hag's bag or a coven's eye, or some other creatures that have an arcane staff next to them, or some kind of focus that they travel with at all times, or something that's always noted as being arcane in some kind of nature. A slowed gem. I might be wrong on the slowed one. Anywho, the point is, detecting magic can actually allow you to detect or spot a lot of other things, because most things in most of these fantasy settings use magic. Unless you're in a really, really low magic setting, when running 5e is generally built for a pretty magic-heavy setting. Pretty high fantasy, that's the word I was looking for. Most of the classes are spellcasters. And even the marshals have subclasses that allow them to use magic. And even without that, the marshals use magic items. which can then be detected and picked up. I'd be going on for a long time just talking about a number of things this can detect. The downside is not too much, outside of if you want this regularly, you have to cast it as a ritual and then also hold concentration on it. 10 minutes for 10 minutes. You could also just cast it as an action using a first level spell slot, which early game that might hurt, late game, chump change. But there is an exception early game that also makes it not even chump change, it makes it a free admission ticket. Eldritch Sight. Eldritch Sight has been the bane of many of my games, at least from my perspective. I allow it, I enjoy it, it's fine. Like I said, I've made my players paranoid enough to always walk into encounters with this ready. Even social ones, just so they could get a gauge of the room or who they're about to talk to, or see if anyone might have anything on them protecting them from some of their items or their artifacts. To the point that every warlock who's been in my games, which if I note correctly, the past 3 campaigns have always had at least one, yes, I said at least, in the party at one time. All of them had Eldritch Sight. I don't blame them. I don't, but sometimes magical traps, effects, things that are supposed to be a bit of a mystery or spell item being just found through detect magic, that is. I mean, fair, divination. It's what it's supposed to do, is find these things. 10 out of 10, by the way. 10 out of 10. I think the length of this video and everything I've discussed and my opinions on it already elaborate why 10 out of 10. If you have another reason as to why it shouldn't be, mention below.